Get us started. And then you can continue to put in to the chat where you're joining us from, what you're teaching. Just want to say, first of all, thank you so much for being here tonight. We know how valuable your time is every year as a teacher, and especially this year, right? There's even less of it. So our hope really is that you walk away from tonight's session with some new ideas and inspiration that you can implement as early as next week in your classroom. So first of all, just to tell you who I am, for those of you who I don't know, I'm Anna Rhymes. I manage the Science News in High Schools program. Been with the Society now for over 4 years, and before that was in the STEM classroom for 10 years, teaching high school science in Washington, D.C. And I'm joined tonight by my colleague, Raina Van Dyne, who is my partner in crime on the Science News in High Schools program. So Raina, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi everyone. I'm Raina Van Dyne. I'm the Associate Specialist on the Science News in High Schools program. I've been here for 2 years. Before that, I was a middle school librarian in Wisconsin. So thank you all for joining us tonight.
All right, so tonight's session, we're really excited to kick off our teacher-to-teacher sessions today, and we are going to be hearing from Jill Levasseur and Brian Dempsey tonight, who are going to be talking about how they've integrated the resources into their classes and also science research programs. So you can see that in our subsequent sessions here in March and in April, we'll have 3 additional presenters, and Raina's going to drop the link to sign up for those sessions in the chat. If you're interested in doing that, we can send you the Zoom info and you won't have to do that later on in the future. So you can go ahead and click that link. Also, if you're interested in presenting in one of these sessions, we would love to hear from you, and you can just email our SNHS account at societyforscience.org. Okay, so just to kind of kick things off here before we hear from Jill and Brian, to tell you a little bit about our programmatic goal and our resources that they will be speaking about tonight, so we're all on the same page. So first off, our programmatic goal really is to increase STEM literacy for high school science students. Not a surprise. We are hoping to do that by encouraging you all and helping you all incorporate the science news journalism into your classroom curricula on a regular basis. And so then the idea is that students will be tying what they're learning in class, classroom concepts, to the latest science research, and also to local phenomena as well as global phenomena around them. You can see on the right-hand side of this slide that we have many programmatic resources, and we're going to be going over a couple of those in the next couple slides.
And one of those resources is our science journalism. So Science News and Science News for Students are the Society's 2 award-winning publications that cover the breadth of science. They're both written by journalists who are experts in their fields and really give you an up-to-date look at the latest scientific research. They're packed with literary devices, which make them easy to read and easy to understand, and also really great literacy-based learning tools. Articles in Science News for Students can be found at sciencenewsforstudents.org and are written with readability scores in the middle school levels. And then Science News articles are found in the print Science News magazine, but also at sciencenews.org. And those are written to the general public and also have readability scores in the high school levels. Both online articles have links to the primary research articles at the bottom of the page, which often link to open source articles. So it's a really great way to get your students to read that primary research, which Brian will be talking about in his presentation.
All right, and so did you know that we also have digital educator guides? If you did, great. If not, I'll just tell you really quickly about them. So basically, we create next generation science standards aligned lesson plans and student worksheets for specific Science News articles. And those articles are generally coming out in the latest Science News issue. We highlight the core curricular STEM content that's actually covered within the article. And then we're also trying within those lesson plans to connect to the cross-curricular nature of the research that's being highlighted in the article. The types of lesson plans that we're creating are comprehension questions, we're creating discussion prompts, and we're also creating hands-on activities. And all of those have answers for you and teacher guides sections so that you essentially are not having to do a lot of additional work to implement the articles and these concepts into your classes. So you can do a keyword search. You see the website there at the bottom at www.sciencenews.org/SNHS. That's where our digital library of these resources is located. And you can also open up one of those newsletters. Hopefully you all get a newsletter every Friday around 10 a.m. Eastern time that is coming with the latest lesson plan that we produce. So those newsletters are basically aggregating content around a specific STEM theme, and we're sending that content out to you. So all of those are also, all of these lesson plans again are attached essentially to an article in Science News. And I tell you that now because this is actually how Jill found the activity that she's going to be talking about today, and then also the article that is paired with that activity. So basically with that, I'm going to hand the session over to Jill, and the way we'll handle the question and answer session is that we will allow, please populate the chat kind of throughout their presentations with questions, and Raina and I will aggregate those questions kind of offline, and then we'll have a question and answer period at the end of both presentations. Okay, so Jill, I will pull up your presentation and we will get started here.
All right. So I'm going to start with a little bit of background about my students so that you have that kind of feel of where I'm coming from in this. So it's 10th grade biology. These are general level biology students. And a little bit about our 9th grade science. It's a course called Energy Explorations, which is NGSS aligned, and it's basically all the different forms of energy. So light energy, thermal energy, nuclear energy, energy transformations. So it has an earth space science focus and physical science focus. My students in general have a very limited chemistry background experience. And also looking at the science and engineering practices as a district, I teach in a small high school in southeastern Connecticut. We began our journey, let's say, into NGSS about 3 years ago. And so the kids haven't had too much exposure to modeling. And so I wanted to integrate some of that into this particular lesson. So if you're not familiar with it, there's an excellent article in the Science Teacher that using a layered approach, which I put a link in the presentation to, which kind of outlines what a model should look like and how students can use this layered approach of building and refining their model. We're also currently in a hybrid schedule, as many of you probably are. I only see my students 2 days a week, and we just started our second semester February 1st. So this was the very first thing that we did after going through characteristics of life. And just as Raina was talking about the Friday newsletters that come in, I had an inspiration at the right time. So as I said, we just finished characteristics of life. I was thinking about biochemistry, which is where we go next. And this article, Life on Earth It may have begun in hostile hot springs, came along with the teacher guide, and it just kind of seemed to be the perfect transition between those two topics for me. So I started the lesson by basically asking the kids what conditions are required for life. Again, we just finished characteristics of life, so they knew about all of those, but what conditions are required for life? And we did this synchronously through a Nearpod during Google Meet, and they did a collaborate board, and we had a quick discussion afterwards. So then the next 2 slides are examples of what the students' responses were to this. So you'll see in one class, they were kind of focused on environment more, like sustainable climate, energy source, and air, water, basic things you might expect students to say about that. And then at the second group, so you can go to the next slide, Anna. Yep. We're more focused more on like the chemicals. So they were talking about carbon and water, carbon dioxide. So it was good to see they had some of that background and understanding of what they might need. And a lot of them were thinking about photosynthesis, obviously, you might imply by what they were posting there. So the connection for me too is the fact that in 2019, the summer of 2019, I went on a Fund for Teachers fellowship with two of my colleagues. That's us there standing in front of the Grand Prismatic Spring in Yellowstone. And we basically went because we wanted to learn more about earth science, and none of us had a really strong earth science background. In teaching these courses, we needed to have that background. So I used these pictures as part of my presentation to the students before we read the article, talking about the hot springs and also talking about the fact that, you know, when you go to Yellowstone and you're seeing all this, you have the revelation that you're really standing on one of the, you know, largest hot spots in the world. And the implications of that are kind of awe-inspiring. So I had the kids look at some of these slides. And if you go to the next slide, there's more images of what I saw while I was there. And ask the kids, you know, what are those colorations from? What are the different colors that you're seeing there? What might they be from? And they had, you know, guessed that they might be minerals, deposit from the earth, different colors there. The greens, you know, some of them suggested maybe it was like an algae. And so the picture on the right is from one of the plaques that was there in front of the hot springs, talking about this living thermometer, that you're actually looking at the different types of thermophiles that live in the different parts of the hot spring depending on the temperature. So then this is a video that I showed the kids next, which was from the National Park Service from Yellowstone about thermophiles. Very good connection to the article, and also talked about the possibility of scientists looking at these thermophiles for the possibility of life on other planets and comparing, you know, the hospital environment of a hot spring to that of potentially another planet. So then we get into the lesson, and basically I had the students read the article independently by themselves, and I provided for them a graphic organizer, which basically asked them to list the requirements for life, the ingredients for life in terms of the elements and compounds that might be there, the interactions or reactions that occur, and then I can't see the last category on the screen there because the chat's over it, but anyways, they had students fill this out, and they did that for homework. And then I also had them make a visual model. So I tweaked the lesson slightly. So in the lesson that came from Science News, the students are asked to write a recipe for life. And I wanted to tweak it because I wanted them to do the modeling. So I asked them to draw a visual model based on the components that they put into their graphic organizer of what life would look like. This was a struggle for some of the students. I had some who didn't really know how to start, and I got some emails and we had some conversations about, okay, well, what did you read in the article? Okay, they talked about hot springs and they talked about hydrothermal vents. So, okay, draw those. And then from there, they started to pick it out. So some of the beginning models, if you go to the next slide, you can see I asked them to leave some space here. They've got some ideas starting to get going here, and then the starting graphic organizers. And then, you know, not every student is going to do exactly what you're planned here. So we have one model, and he's basically just got, I think, what's supposed to be a hot spring and all these terms coming out of it. So not quite getting the concept of what we wanted for that model there. And his graphic organizer a little bit lacking too. So don't always want to just show the best work, but the reality of it, right? So some more additional initial models that the students made. Remember, most of these kids are doing this at home, so whatever materials they had to do it with, it didn't have to be colorful. I always tell them I can't draw, so they don't have to go crazy over drawing. And then so the next day we met, again, I'm synchronously teaching, so half my kids are in front of me and half are on a Google Meet. And from the resource, there were 11 additional articles that were related to this article. And as Raina said, the nice part about these articles, if you needed to differentiate, they are different reading levels, and it identifies those within the articles, so you could very easily select which students to read which articles. I didn't do that. I simply just kind of mixed them up and each gave them different articles to read. And then I gave them some focus questions. And again, in the lesson plan that came from Science News, you can look at this lesson from the standpoint of a biology, of the chemistry, of the physics, of earth science, or even of astronomy. And I've kind of mished those together so that I got something that fit mostly biology, but covered some of those other topics as well, again, to kind of pull in what their previous knowledge was and to pull in some of the chemistry that they may not have had that strong. So I asked them as they read the article to think about those focus questions, not to physically answer them, but to keep them in their focus as they read the article. And then I placed them into breakout rooms by just taking 4 students randomly who read different articles, putting them together and asking them from there to discuss what they read, everybody add to their graphic organizers, and then to go back that night and revise their models. So these are the students as they were in their chat rooms, and some of them are out in the hallway because we had like 12 kids in the room and 12 kids at home, and the noise gets it's kind of funny how you don't have everybody there, but it sounded really loud. So some of them were in the hallway working, just having their discussions. And then these are the revised models. So the one on the left you saw previously where she had left some space, and now she's added into their information that she got from one of the articles about how asteroids or meteorites may have added, some of the basic elements that we needed to make these organic compounds available on Earth. And the student on the right, she took a look at it from the possibility of life existing on another planet. So she actually went and did some additional reading about a moon of somewhere and said, well, could this possibly support life based on what she read there? So I thought that was kind of interesting. And again, just more detail. So the initial models, this is the follow-up model of one of the ones that was very simple in the beginning. And the student, kind of got the synthesis of it and started to put things together. So I thought they did a pretty good job. And again, revised graphic organizers can see they just added more information, and the information varied depending on the articles that they read. And a few more. So to wrap it up, or to follow up with the students, we did do a review of the models. I posted the models. We didn't do a gallery walk, but one thing you could do, since I have pictures of them, you could post them via Google Meet or even in Google Form and have the kids do an individual kind of review of the models. But we just talked about what should have been in the models. And then also followed this with the TED Ed video, which basically, again, follows the concept of, how did life form on Earth? And we don't really know the truth here, but, from what best we can tell, there are 2 different, scenarios of where life could form. Also on the bottom left there, that's from HHI Interactive. They have a deep history of life on Earth. So it's kind of a timeline of what we best believe, how life had formed and how it changed. So from how do we get from simple organisms like those thermophiles into more complex life forms? And students are always interested in that. And then there's one more slide which just came out this week, the information that was like perfect timing. If you all saw it, the video that shows the discovery of the sea sponges that are half a mile down beneath the Antarctic ice. So this happened, just right after we finished the lesson. So I shared this with the kids and said, okay, so now here's the monkey wrench. We're saying we have to have heat. And now we're finding these sponges that are living where there's no heat, there's no hydrothermal vents nearby. Scientists don't understand how these are getting nutrients or how often, because according to what I've heard, the currents are way far away from where they are, where these sponges were found. And so they don't even know if they're eating on a regular basis or not. So that was kind of interesting. So I saw a couple of questions pop up in the chat there if you want me to address those now. This took actually only 2 days in class for me to do this. The first article they read in class, and then started their graphic organizer, did their model for homework, and then we did the follow-up with the articles, the additional articles the second day, and they finished up their models that following night. So that was our schedule, and we are a block schedule, so I have 90-minute class periods, so that's 2 90-minute class periods.
Thank you, Jill. I have another question. Did you grade or evaluate the students? And if so, did you have a rubric, or how did you determine their grade for this assignment?
Yeah, so typically when I do a model, actually there is one more slide. So if you click that next one, that'll kind of answer it too. Typically when I do a model, I'm not necessarily grading it. I did this time just because I wanted to give them some feedback. So I had a checklist based on, I read through the article, and what at minimum should have been in their graphic organizers, and therefore reflecting those same things within their models. So it was a simple homework grade. I didn't do it as anything like an assessment. So I started to think about an assessment, and now the original lesson plan design is for the students to actually create a recipe for life. So, what are the ingredients for life? What are the conditions that are needed? What would be the, instructions you would write for somebody if they were going to create life? So I started to design that lesson, which is on the left there, but then I thought about it. We're going into our biochemistry unit. We're going to go to the basic macromolecules, carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, nucleic acids. And I figured at that point, that might be a good time to then reassess them and have them revisit their models and now write that recipe for those macromolecules and include, conditions, where these would be likely to occur, and maybe a scenario type question with there's a new planet or a new location on Earth where they think life may have formed. Does this have the right conditions to form on Earth? But that's still kind of processing in my head. So
thank you very much, Jill.
You're welcome.
Great, thank you, Jill. We'll take the rest of the questions at the end, but for now, Brian, you want to turn on your video and we can transfer to your presentation.
Excellent. Thank you, Jill. Welcome, everybody. Hope everybody is safe during these crazy weather events we're having, and during a pandemic, no less, but also really exciting times too. I'm sure some of you are watching Perseverance land on Mars today, and actually I'll be talking a little bit about Mars rovers as we get into this talk. So as you can see, I am a biology teacher in Massachusetts. These are my students. This is the first year we headed off to a science fair, the Region 4 Science Fair in Massachusetts. And you can go ahead and start clicking these. They're kind of layered in there. So I teach a summer science research program. And so these are the students that are from that group. And so I'll tell you a little bit more. You can keep on clicking, Anna. I also advise a research club. And so that started this year. So we meet after school. Of course, this year it's all on Zoom. But this gives me another opportunity to mentor students outside of school time. And then this year we also started an explorations in visual arts and science, which is sort of under the umbrella of STEAM. I teach that with an art teacher. And so students are getting skills for both, doing science fair experiments, but they're also creating a sculpture based on data. So it's called data art. So it's sort of, wearing two different kind of hats in that. But what I'm going to focus on here is the Summer Science Research Program. So you can go ahead and click on the next one. So the idea of the Summer Science Research Program is it's basically students are playing. And so, students are encouraged to, ultimately fail and recognize that failure is an important part of their learning, and then to recognize what were the issues that went wrong in an experiment, let's say, revise that, repeat, and so forth. And so, science is always an ongoing process. All right, so there's 3 themes of the Summer Science Research Program. And the first one is biomimicry. And the idea here is that students design and engineer using inspiration from nature. So for example, all kinds of art technologies that we've developed by studying nature, like Velcro, you're probably familiar with. And I'll look at some examples coming up soon with you in this particular discussion. Also biomedical. So we use fruit flies, a type of worm called C. elegans during the summer. And also citizen science, and students study invasive species. They look at how some plants like garlic mustard make chemicals, it's called allelopathy, which inhibit the growth of other plants. But what we're going to look at mostly in this presentation is biomimicry. So here are my students. So the kids are mostly entering 9th or 10th grade. There are a couple kids going into their 11th grade, but for the most part, they're underclassmen. And so we've been getting science news for a number of years to high school. And so I love getting the printed versions, and you can put these out on the tables. I encourage kids to take 5 home with them, and then they pick an article which interests them, and then they later share that with a class. But for this example, I'm going to focus on an article that I discovered back in 2019. And so what this is it's based on the rover Opportunity. And so what was beginning to happen, you can click that and you can see here's the description of it. So with Martian autumn beginning on March 23rd, plunging solar powered rover into the colder and darker days, NASA officially called it quits on February 13th. So the idea is that, when the colder temperatures were starting to kick in, they've been on there for years, of course, it made it harder and harder for the rover to work. And so one thing we wanted to look at is, could we look into nature to get ideas about how organisms do better or worse in different temperatures? And we'll look at a biomimicry example in just a minute. So the organisms that we use are called Madagascar hissing cockroaches, or MHCs for short. And they're a great model because they're quite large, as you're going to see a little movie coming up. And they're, in some ways frightening to the kids, but also gets them very much engaged. And so you can see all the kids are taking over a little Tupperware container. They get some bark mulch, which is like a matrix for the cockroaches to live on, some food, some water, and then they have to care for those organisms over 6 weeks, which is the course of the summer science research program. And so ultimately, we're looking at how insects like, Madagascar hissing cockroaches, for example, serve as inspiration for robotics. There's actually a local company in Massachusetts called Boston Dynamics, and they make a wide range of robots, including some that are based on insects. And one goal I have is to reach out to them and maybe do like a Zoom call or maybe go on a field trip. So lots of opportunities to do there. All right, so ultimately the research question is, how can Madagascar hissing cockroaches serve as a model for how extraterrestrial rovers perform in the cold? So here's an experiment which they did. And so they've got a treatment group in which the Madagascar hissing cockroaches were subjected to a colder temperature using just basically an ice bath, and then also room temperature as a control group. And you can see over on the y-axis there, the banana consumed, and what they looked at is the initial minus the final mass. So basically to see how much banana was consumed in a colder environment versus a warmer one. And you can see the error bars there just to show it's statistically significant between those two groups. And so that basically served as a sort of a launching point for them to get some measurements or show them how they could get measurements using Madagascar hissing cockroaches and to answer a research question. So the next thing that they did is they used the Science News online version to then do a search. So for example, if you type in robots and animals, here are some examples of some searches that come up. And so the flying robot could reveal secrets of the aerial world of insects. Here's what robots could learn from fire ants, which is sort of a way that insects communicate with each other. And also earwigs take origami to the extremes to fold their wings. And you can see that, just insects alone serve as a real inspiration. And so if you click that again, you'll see that over 40 articles were found for just robots and animals. And so I just featured 3 of those, but the list goes on and on and on for pages and pages of this. And one of the great things about using science news is, first of all, if students try to do a search of something, let's say on biomimicry, a lot of the time they'll find that there's this vast sea of information, and it's kind of overwhelming, and a lot of the articles are not necessarily relevant to what they're trying to find. And then, of course, science news has been around since 1921. So we're talking about 100 years worth of articles that students can pour through. And science news, of course, is written for a high school audience, right? So, they're reading about current developments. So where the primary source of an article is written for a high school audience. And when students read that article, they can look down the bottom, the actual source from where that article was found, maybe like in a journal like Nature or Cell or whatever. They can go to the actual source from where that article was found, find the original published source, and even better, they can even find the author of the paper. So maybe they want to reach out to that scientist and get some question and feedback kind of thing, and that could even lead to some mentoring potentially with that scientist as well. So, but this is a great way to kind of start in a very kind of supported way with articles that are easily targeted and also appropriate for high schools. So then they began their student-led investigations. You can see over on the left-hand side, we had a rain gutter, that I brought in, and it basically serves as sort of like a racetrack. And so they can, get maybe males and females to compete against each other. And Madagascar hissing cockroaches are easy to identify gender. They could do different sizes. There's even different stages as they begin to develop, where they begin to molt, and a lot of things they can compare to. And I don't know if that video is going to play for you, but basically, let's try to, you need access. Sorry about that. I usually play that off my own computer, but I'll describe what that movie is. Basically, it's showing a Madagascar hissing cockroach with a, if you use a weighing dish, for measuring some chemical, and you can take a little hole puncher and punch out a little circle from that, and then tie a string to the cockroach. And then what I did is I used a paper clip to make a harness. And what students did is they put pennies into that weighing dish, and you can kind of see that in the image where there's a cockroach attached to the weighing dish with pennies in it, and it gets heavier and heavier. And so they're basically saying, they can find the mass in which the cockroach will pull on a certain weight. And that's certainly related to potentially robotics. If students or scientists are trying to get ideas about what a particular type of organism can pull, and maybe get some ideas for designing robots based on that. All right, so here's some more student investigations. So they can make mazes in which the cockroaches, of course, they're finding their food through smell, but they can also remember things as well. And so they can do several trials and see if there's a difference in learning, for example. And then ultimately what this can lead to is kids going to a science fair. So here's the Region 4 Science Fair in Massachusetts. This is one of my students that she was using the maze of the cockroaches. Now, not all the kids, of course, are going to use, Madagascar hissing cockroaches. That's not the goal. This is just to give them an idea of how organisms can be used to carry out an investigation, and using science news to help them do that. This girl here on the left-hand side, she was using planaria, and she was looking at regeneration. And then you can keep on clicking. There's other competitions, like this is the Massachusetts Science and Engineering Fair, the Junior Science and Humanities Symposium, which is a national organization, Regeneron Science Talent Search. Another great thing about science news, of course, is, this is connected to Society for Science of the Public, which supports the Regeneron Science Talent Search, as well as and you can click on the next one, the International Science and Engineering Fair as well. And then finally, students can even publish their work. This is called the Journal of Emerging Investigators. And so, we have a student this year that's going to be published in that. In this particular picture here with me picture with my students, we even had a girl that went off to ISEF, using her research. So the science news is just a great platform to get students to do that literature review and to get them started. So look forward to answering any of your questions. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Brian. We do have a question. What is another example of a research project that students have done that was inspired by Science News? If you have.
Yeah, so there was an article that came out, I don't remember which issue it was, but it was about zombie flies. And so there's a type of fungus that infects insects, including fruit flies, and it changes their behavior. So in the case of the fruit flies, it affects their nervous system. So they want to, crawl up to a high place where the fungal spores then emerge and infect new flies. And so I was able to find a video that was related to that after reading that article. And there's a scientist that was featured in the video that works at Harvard University, which is in Massachusetts, not too far from our school. And I showed that to the class, and this girl got really interested in it. And so I contacted the scientist, and I asked, could we get some of these flies and some of the fungus? And so she said, sure. She sent them to me. And then this student of mine began to, this is from an AP biology class, began to, set up the area where she would have these flies and need a certain humidity and certain light cycle. So we had a little timer with a light that would go on and off. And of course, then the pandemic hit. And so she was quite worried that she was going to be able to even conduct this experiment. But the scientist, her name is Dr. Elia at Harvard University. She also had to go home because her lab was closed down at that time too. And so my student and Dr. Elia were corresponding about how can we set these experiments up at home. And so she was able to conduct her work. In fact, she was a Regeneron Science scholar this past year for those investigations on fruit flies, where she noticed that the flies lost their sense of smell once they're infected by the fungus. And so that was a new finding that hadn't been observed before. And then she's also publishing in the Journal of Emerging Investigators as well. So.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so feel free to put your questions in the chat now. Jill, you can get back on video so we can have you answer some questions as well. Jill, I guess this question is more for you. Are there other SNHS lesson plans that you have integrated into your curriculum?
Yes, on top of my head, one that pops into my head a lot is about crabs and smelling. I forgot the title of it. Maybe you remember, Rihanna. Something about crabs and smelling. They can smell the dead. So it's very like catching, engaging.
It's about hermit crabs.
What's it? Yeah, it's about hermit crabs, right? And it's very, very engaging article for the kids. And I use that when I'm looking at natural selection and adaptations and evolution. So that's another one that pops into my head. There's probably some others that I'm just not thinking of at the moment.
Great, yeah, I just put that one in the chat so people can look at that one. That's one of our favorites. That was a fun one.
And just, I'm going to say this too, is as the articles in the magazines come, I don't know what everybody else does with them, but I immediately rip through them, find the articles that correspond to things that I teach, and I put little tabs in them, and then I kind of, put them where that unit is that I'm teaching. So I'm constantly putting the articles out, looking at the picture that's there. That's the one about waiting for Asia and talking about plate tectonics. So just wherever they, pop in, and again, more the students can read, the greater their knowledge becomes, and just the more well-versed in what's going on in the world, I think.
Great, thank you. Edwina, you had a question. Do you want to unmute and ask that one?
Oh, sure, thank you. So I have some teachers asking me, they're just not sure where to start if they haven't used Science News before. I know you've given some great examples, but do you have any suggestions pertaining to that?
So you want to start?
Sure. I think the best place to start is with the guides that come, the teacher guides, because if you're going to try something the first time without having to create something on your own, they're fully developed. They're NGSS aligned. They have, a hierarchy of questions that are good. So if you were looking to just use it in a classroom, I might try it for the first time, just the way they are. And I have done that, and they do work fine. And then from there, you'll probably, brainstorm, how can I make this different or evolve it into something, more fitting for my classroom.
Yeah, and I really like the search tool, like I was explaining with the biomimicry example. So, pairing together two words and narrowing in on something that might be relevant for what you want to focus on. And you can find a lot of articles that way.
All right, thank you all. Let me start my video here. Thank you all for joining. Thank you to Jill and Brian for your wonderful presentations. We really appreciate your time.
Thank
Yes,
you. Thank you for everybody who came to listen tonight.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Really appreciate you all being here. And please tune in for our sessions, our subsequent sessions in March and April as well. We will have totally different examples of how educators are using the resources. And again, we know you all are the experts at this. And so again, being able to share these examples will hopefully just, spark an idea in trying something new, right? I think that's the whole idea of these teacher to teacher sessions. So yeah, so please go do some searching in the archive and the digital library for resources. And we hope to see you again in March. And thanks again to Jill and Brian for kicking this off in such a wonderful way. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.